Escaping Bear Creek Swamp. Evil Unleashed Chapter 1. The Dare. In the heart of Autauga County, Alabama, on the outskirts of a small town named Oakwood, there existed a legend that had been passed down through generations. It was a tale whispered by old-timers on front porches, a story told to children to keep them in check after dark. It was the legend of Bear Creek Swamp. Jack, Mike, Ethan, and Ben were typical small-town teenagers, bound together by a friendship forged on the schoolyard, an unbreakable bond that had held strong since their earliest days. They were known throughout Oakwood as the Fearless Four, always looking for the next adventure, the next thrill to chase, and the next dare to conquer. One gloomy autumn evening, as they gathered at Jack's place for a sleepover, they found themselves engrossed in tales of Bear Creek Swamp. Jack's older brother, who had recently returned from college, regaled them with the spookiest stories he'd heard from the locals. "They say the swamp comes alive at night," he began, his voice laced with a hint of dread. Phantom cars race down the road, vanishing into thin air. Floating orbs of light dance through the trees, and the ghosts of Creek Indians, Civil War soldiers, and settlers haunt the place. But the worst, he paused for dramatic effect, is the vengeful spirit of a mother who lost her child. "If you dare to say, 'We have your baby,' 3 times, she'll appear and attack." The room grew silent as the tales sank in. Their imaginations ran wild, feeding off the thrill of the unknown. Finally, Ben broke the silence, his eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "We should check it out," he said, his voice trembling ever so slightly. His suggestion hung in the air like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over the room. But before fear could creep in, Jack, the unofficial leader of the group, gave a sly grin. "Why not? It's just stories, right? We're the Fearless Four, after all." Mike nodded in agreement, while Ethan, always the voice of reason, hesitated for a moment before conceding. The pact was sealed, and the atmosphere in the room shifted from trepidation to exhilaration. Their plan was simple. They'd drive as close to Bear Creek Swamp as they could, park the car, and then venture on foot. Armed with flashlights, they'd explore the notorious swamp and put these legends to rest. Or so they thought. As they set out that night, excitement coursed through their veins, overriding the undercurrent of unease. The car tires crunched gravel as they approached the edge of the swamp, where the road seemed to vanish into an inky void. The surrounding woods seemed to whisper warnings, but the Fearless Four ignored them, propelled forward by their youthful curiosity. They parked the car a safe distance from the swamp's edge and stepped out into the moonlit night. Flashlights pierced the darkness as they delved deeper into the wilderness, guided by nothing but the tales and legends they had heard. The air grew thick with tension as they journeyed further into the unknown, their footsteps echoing eerily in the stillness. It wasn't long before they heard strange, unexplained sounds, an eerie rustling of leaves, a distant, mournful wail, and the unsettling sensation of being watched. Nervous laughter punctuated the silence as they dismissed these phenomena as mere products of their imagination. But deep down, doubt clawed at the edges of their bravado, and the realization that Bear Creek Swamp held secrets beyond their wildest imagination began to take root. As they ventured deeper into the swamp's heart, a sinister fog began to roll in, obscuring their vision and adding to the feeling of impending doom. Unbeknownst to them, the legends of Bear Creek Swamp were not mere stories but a prelude to a nightmarish reality they were about to confront. Chapter 2. Into the Abyss. The inky blackness of Bear Creek Swamp enveloped the Fearless Four as they ventured further into its depths. The pale beams of their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing gnarled trees and twisted vines that seemed to reach out like skeletal fingers from the shadows. "Stay close, guys," Jack muttered, his bravado masking the unease he felt creeping up his spine. The others nodded, their nervousness unspoken but palpable. They were deep into the unknown now, and their courage was put to the test with each step they took. Strange noises echoed through the swamp, whispering secrets to those who dared to listen. The low hum of unseen insects filled the air, creating a disconcerting symphony of nature's night sounds. Branches creaked and leaves rustled, as if the very swamp itself were alive and watching. Mike, typically the joker of the group, was the first to speak up. "Did you guys hear that?" His voice wavered, his flashlight trembling in his hand. Ethan, ever the rational thinker, tried to dispel the growing unease. "It's probably just animals, guys. No need to freak out." But even as he spoke those words, the eerie lights they'd heard about began to appear. Soft, ghostly orbs of light flickered in the distance, drawing their attention like moths to a flame. They bobbed and danced among the trees, casting an eerie glow on the swamp's murky waters. Those are the lights people were talking about," Ben stammered, his heart pounding in his chest. Jack tried to muster some bravado. "They're just swamp gas or something. Nothing to be afraid of." However, their bravado was short-lived as the orbs of light drew nearer, swirling around them like mischievous spirits. The air grew colder, and the forest seemed to close in, the shadows shifting and contorting as if they had a life of their own. In the distance, they heard a faint, mournful wail. It was a sound that sent shivers down their spines, a lamentation that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the swamp. Panic clawed at them, but they pressed on, determined to prove their fearlessness. As they walked deeper into the abyss, the swamp's terrain became treacherous. Muddy pits threatened to pull them under, and the ground seemed to shift beneath their feet. They stumbled and fell, their flashlights casting eerie shadows that danced around them. Just when they thought they couldn't take it any longer, they stumbled upon something that made their blood run cold. In the dim light of their flashlights, they saw it, a figure roughly 4 feet tall, with matted, tangled hair and vacant, milky eyes. It stood in their path, its grotesque form a chilling amalgamation of mud, twigs, and what appeared to be rotting flesh. The friends froze, their hearts pounding in their chests, as the swamp thing swayed eerily in front of them. It made no sound, but its very presence seemed to scream danger. Panic welled up inside them, and their bravado crumbled into terror. "Run!" Jack shouted, his voice trembling with fear. Without hesitation, they turned and fled, crashing through the underbrush, the swamp thing's ghastly form fading into the darkness behind them. As they ran, the swamp seemed to come alive, the eerie lights and strange noises closing in around them. The fearless four were no longer daring adventurers but frightened boys lost in a malevolent wilderness, pursued by something beyond their comprehension. And as they stumbled through the heart of Bear Creek Swamp, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the swamp itself had become their adversary, and that their fate was far from certain. Chapter 3 The Rotten Encounter. Their frantic footsteps pounded through the night as the fearless four fled the ghastly apparition that had materialized before them. Their flashlights shook in their trembling hands, casting wild beams of light that painted the swamp's eerie landscape in stark, fleeting relief. "Keep running." Jack's voice cracked with terror as he led the way, his heart pounding in his chest. Behind him, his friends struggled to keep pace, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The swamp's malevolent presence seemed to press in on them, its relentless grip growing tighter with every step. The grotesque creature that had emerged from the shadows continued to pursue them, its form a nightmarish fusion of mud, twigs, and what appeared to be rotting flesh. It moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, limbs twisting and contorting as it closed the distance between them. Panic set in like a fever, gnawing at their resolve. "What is that thing?" Ben's voice trembled as he glanced over his shoulder, catching a glimpse of the swamp thing's unrelenting pursuit. "I don't know, but we can't stop." Jack shouted back, his determination a fragile shield against the horrors that surrounded them. Ethan, ever the logical thinker, tried to make sense of their situation. "Maybe it's just a person in a costume, trying to scare us." But the swamp thing's appearance defied such rationalization. Its form shifted and morphed, as if it were composed of the very elements of the swamp itself. Mud oozed from its limbs, twigs sprouted from its grotesque body, and the stench of decay hung in the air around it. As they continued to run, the swamp seemed to conspire against them. Muddy pits threatened to ensnare their feet, while tangled roots and vines reached out like skeletal hands, eager to trip them up. The eerie lights bobbed and weaved, casting disorienting illusions that added to their confusion. "We need to find a way out," Mike gasped, his voice strained with desperation. Jack's flashlight beam swept the darkness, revealing an eerie, otherworldly landscape. The swamp was an ever-shifting maze, its terrain treacherous and unforgiving. The four friends felt like insects caught in a sinister web, struggling to break free. The swamp thing was relentless, its unnatural movements allowing it to close the gap. A low, guttural growl emanated from its twisted form, sending a chill down their spines. They were trapped in a nightmare, pursued by a malevolent entity that defied all reason. And then, as if by some cruel twist of fate, they stumbled upon a grim revelation, a clearing in the swamp that held the remains of previous explorers. Mangled and decomposed, the bodies were a stark reminder of the horrors that lurked within Bear Creek Swamp. Panic gave way to sheer terror as the realization sank in. They were not the first to be pursued by the swamp thing, nor would they be the last. The swamp, it seemed, hungered for souls, and they were its latest prey. With a renewed surge of fear-fueled energy, they pushed forward, determined to escape the clearing and the abomination that pursued them. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, and their strength waned, but the will to survive burned bright within them. As they fled deeper into the heart of Bear Creek Swamp, they could no longer dismiss the legends as mere tales. They were living a nightmare, pursued by an entity beyond their comprehension, and the swamp itself seemed to conspire against them. The Fearless Four had ventured into the abyss, and now they were fighting for their very lives in a place where darkness and dread held sway. Chapter 4: Haunting Apparitions. The Fearless Four continued their desperate flight through the unforgiving labyrinth of Bear Creek Swamp. Every step taken deeper into the nightmarish abyss felt like a descent into madness. The oppressive atmosphere pressed down on them, suffocating their courage. As they stumbled onward, their flashlights flickered and dimmed, their batteries depleted by the relentless pursuit. Shadows danced in the corners of their vision, and the night seemed to come alive with malevolent intent. Whispers, both audible and imagined, echoed through the dense trees. Jack, Mike, Ethan, and Ben were no longer the fearless adventurers who had entered the swamp. Fear gnawed at the edges of their sanity, and doubt clawed at their hearts. The legends of Bear Creek Swamp, once dismissed as mere tales, had become their inescapable reality. Then, in the heart of the oppressive darkness, they saw them, apparitions that defied explanation and reason. Figures dressed in tattered clothing, bearing the insignias of Creek Indians, Civil War soldiers, and early settlers, emerged from the shadows. Their forms were spectral, shimmering with an eerie, otherworldly light. Fear and disbelief gripped the friends as they witnessed these haunting visions. The apparitions moved silently, their eyes vacant yet filled with an ancient sorrow that seeped into the very marrow of their bones. The air grew frigid around them, and the swamp's oppressive presence intensified. Mike's voice trembled as he uttered what they were all thinking. "Those are the ghosts. The legends. They're real." Ethan's logical mind struggled to find a rational explanation, but the evidence before them defied all attempts at logical dismissal. It's a trick, right? A prank set up by someone to scare us?" But the spectral figures paid no heed to their words, continuing their mournful procession through the swamp. The apparitions seemed to be reliving moments from the past, their movements and expressions etched with pain and despair. A sense of foreboding washed over the Fearless Four as they pressed on, their steps echoing in the unnatural silence that followed the apparitions' passing. Each ghostly encounter weighed on their minds, filling them with an unshakable dread. The swamp's malevolent aura seemed to intensify, as if the legends themselves were conspiring against them. The trees closed in around them, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Vines seemed to come alive, entwining their ankles and threatening to trip them. The eerie lights that had once seemed like playful spirits now took on a sinister quality, casting eerie, elongated shadows that seemed to move independently of their source. The whispers in the wind grew louder, their voices carrying messages that were both incomprehensible and unsettling. Desperation surged through them as they grappled with the realization that they were trapped in a nightmare. There was no escape from Bear Creek Swamp, and the legends they had dared to challenge were exacting a terrible toll. In the distance, the mournful wail that had haunted their footsteps grew louder, its eerie resonance filling their ears. It was as if the very swamp itself was mourning their presence, lamenting their intrusion into its cursed domain. As the Fearless Four continued to navigate the haunted realm of Bear Creek Swamp, the line between reality and legend blurred. They had come face to face with the apparitions of those who had suffered in the swamp's dark past, and the dread that gripped them was a relentless reminder that they were no longer in control of their fate. They were entangled in the web of the supernatural, and the swamp's secrets were closing in, ready to consume them whole. Chapter 5: A Mother's Vengeance. The haunted echoes of Bear Creek Swamp seemed to grow louder with each passing moment, and the Fearless Four pressed on, haunted by the ghostly apparitions they had encountered. The air was thick with dread, and the swamp's malevolence was unrelenting. As they trudged forward, the swamp's eerie silence was shattered by the mournful wail that had become a constant companion to their terror-filled journey. It pierced through their fear, a haunting reminder of the horrors that lurked within. In their desperation to escape, the four friends stumbled upon a clearing unlike any they had seen before. It was a desolate, moonlit space surrounded by gnarled trees, their branches reaching out like skeletal arms. In the center of the clearing, a spectral figure stood, her form bathed in an ethereal glow. The figure was that of a woman, her eyes filled with a sorrow so profound it sent shivers down their spines. Her hair hung in disheveled tangles, and her clothing was of an era long past, tattered and worn. She cradled something in her arms, a spectral child, her lost baby. As they watched in stunned silence, the woman's mournful gaze locked onto them, and her voice, a hollow whisper, cut through the oppressive stillness. "My baby. My baby. Give me back my baby." Panic gripped the Fearless Four as they realized the truth. They had unwittingly uttered the forbidden phrase, the one that was said to invoke the wrath of the vengeful mother spirit. The legends were coming to life before their very eyes, and they were trapped in a nightmare of their own making. "Run!" Jack shouted, his voice tinged with terror. But there was nowhere to run. The clearing seemed to shift and contort, the very ground beneath them twisting as if to thwart their escape. The ghostly apparition advanced, her spectral child cradled in her arms. The woman's eyes bore into them, her gaze filled with a mother's desperate anguish. As she drew nearer, her spectral form seemed to warp and twist, her features contorting into a grotesque mask of rage and sorrow. She reached out for them, her fingers like icy tendrils, and the air around her grew colder. Ethan's rational mind fought to make sense of the supernatural horror unfolding before them. "We need to calm her down. We need to tell her we don't have her baby." But it was too late. The woman's wails grew louder, her anguish turning into a piercing scream that reverberated through the clearing. It was a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality, filling the air with a palpable sense of dread. The spectral child in her arms began to change, its form contorting and shifting. It morphed into a grotesque, misshapen figure, its eyes empty voids of malevolence. The baby was no longer an innocent soul but a manifestation of the swamp's darkest horrors. The Fearless Four were cornered, their backs against the nightmarish tableau before them. The vengeful mother spirit drew closer, her spectral child now a twisted abomination that seemed hungry for their souls. There was no escape, no rational explanation, only the unrelenting grip of the supernatural. In the heart of Bear Creek Swamp, they had unleashed a terror beyond imagination, and now they were paying the price. As the vengeful spirit closed in, her hollow eyes filled with malice, the Fearless Four were forced to confront the grim reality that they were no longer the hunters but the hunted, trapped in a nightmare that showed no mercy. Chapter 6: The Doll Graveyard. The Fearless Four stood frozen in the clearing, their eyes locked onto the spectral mother and her grotesque, malevolent child. The vengeful spirit's mournful cries had transformed into a bone-chilling scream that reverberated through the swamp, shattering their resolve. "We have to do something." Jack's voice trembled as he fumbled for words. The apparition was closing in, its ghostly fingers reaching out for them. Ethan, ever the quick thinker, glanced around desperately, searching for anything that could help them. His flashlight beam swept across the clearing, revealing something that sent shivers down their spines, a grim tableau of eerie, ghostly dolls. The dolls were placed on bamboo stakes that jutted out from the ground, their lifeless eyes staring vacantly into the night. Their hair had been painted a sickly shade of white, adding to their unsettling appearance. It was as if they had been impaled as some grotesque offering to the swamp's malevolence. As the apparition of the vengeful mother spirit drew nearer, the dolls seemed to come alive with an eerie energy of their own. Their heads turned, their limbs moved, and their lifeless eyes followed the intruder's every move. The clearing became a nightmarish puppet show, and the Fearless Four were the unwilling audience. Mike's voice quavered as he muttered, This can't be real, right? It's just a prank. It has to be." But the dolls' unnatural movements defied explanation. They twisted and contorted, their joints creaking as they reached out toward the intruders. It was as if the dolls themselves were cursed, bound to this eerie clearing by a malevolent force. The apparition was closing in, her hollow eyes filled with malice. Panic surged through the Fearless Four as they realized there was no escape from the relentless onslaught of the supernatural. They had ventured too deep into the heart of Bear Creek Swamp, and now they were ensnared in a nightmare of their own making. In a desperate bid to fend off the encroaching horrors, Jack raised his flashlight and shone it directly at the vengeful spirit. The beam of light pierced through her spectral form, causing her to recoil with a ghastly, anguished cry. It seemed that light had power over the supernatural, if only for a fleeting moment. Ethan, inspired by Jack's actions, directed his flashlight toward the dolls on the bamboo stakes. The beams of light caused the dolls to twitch and writhe, their movements growing more erratic. It was a chilling display of the unnatural forces that held sway in the swamp. Ben, his heart pounding in his chest, joined in the effort. The combined beams of their flashlights created a dazzling, otherworldly display that momentarily held the apparition and the dolls at bay. It was a tenuous reprieve, but it gave them a moment to catch their breath. With the apparition and the dolls temporarily subdued, the Fearless Four knew they had to make a choice. They could stay and confront the supernatural horrors that surrounded them, or they could press on deeper into the heart of Bear Creek Swamp, hoping to find an escape from this nightmare. But as they turned to continue their journey, they couldn't shake the feeling that the swamp itself was watching, that its malevolence was unrelenting, and that their ordeal was far from over. In the eerie glow of their flashlights, they pressed forward, knowing that the dolls and the vengeful spirit were not the only horrors that Bear Creek Swamp had in store for them. Chapter 7 Whispering Shadows. The Fearless Four pressed on through the malevolent heart of Bear Creek Swamp, their flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. The eerie encounter with the vengeful spirit and the unsettling doll graveyard had left them shaken, their resolve tested to its limits. As they walked deeper into the nightmarish labyrinth, a sense of dread settled over them like a shroud. The swamp's oppressive presence weighed heavily on their shoulders, and every rustle of leaves, every whispered breath of wind, seemed to carry an ominous message. It was Ethan who suggested reviewing the audio recording they had made earlier in the evening when they first entered the swamp. The small recorder had captured their hesitant footsteps, their nervous laughter, and the eerie sounds that had echoed through the trees. With trembling hands, they played back the recording, their flashlights casting flickering shadows on the small screen. The familiar sounds of the swamp filled the air, the chirping of insects, the rustling of leaves, and the mournful wail that had haunted their journey. But then, amidst the background noise, they heard it, a sinister whisper that sent a chill down their spines. "Get out of here," a cold, disembodied voice hissed, the words dripping with malice and contempt. Their hearts skipped a beat as they replayed the recording, hoping it had been a trick of their imagination. But there was no denying it. The voice was real, and it was a warning they couldn't ignore. "Who said that?" Mike's voice trembled as he glanced around, his flashlight beam sweeping the darkness. Is someone messing with us? Ben's eyes widened with fear as realization dawned. No one else is out here. It's just us, and whatever else is lurking in this swamp. The sinister whisper had shattered their illusions of being alone in the darkness. It was a message that sent a clear, bone-chilling signal. They were not welcome here, and the swamp itself seemed to conspire against their presence. Jack's grip tightened on the recorder as he spoke, his voice filled with unease. We have to get out of here. This place is cursed, and whatever's out here doesn't want us here. Ethan nodded in agreement, his rational mind overruled by the mounting terror. I never believed in this stuff before, but there's something evil in this swamp. They turned to leave, their footsteps echoing through the eerie silence that had settled over Bear Creek Swamp. But as they retraced their steps, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that unseen eyes followed their every move. The whispering shadows seemed to close in around them, the darkness shifting and contorting as if it held secrets too terrible to comprehend. The swamp had become a malevolent entity, and they were intruders in its cursed domain. As they made their way through the oppressive darkness, the sinister whisper continued to haunt them, echoing in their minds like a relentless refrain. Get out of here, it hissed, a chilling reminder that they were not alone, that the supernatural forces of the swamp were determined to drive them away. The fearless four had ventured into a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. The swamp's secrets remained hidden in the shadows, and they were left with a growing sense of dread that their ordeal was far from over. In the heart of Bear Creek Swamp, they were pawns in a malevolent game, and the rules were set by forces beyond their comprehension. Chapter 8 Lost and Trapped. The sinister whisper still echoed in their minds as the fearless four pressed on through the unforgiving heart of Bear Creek Swamp. The malevolent presence that seemed to surround them had grown even more oppressive, and they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being herded like cattle toward an unknown fate. Their flashlights cast erratic beams of light that cut through the darkness, revealing gnarled trees and tangled underbrush that all seemed eerily similar. Every step they took felt like a cruel repetition, as if the swamp itself were mocking their attempts to escape. We should have listened to the warning, Mike muttered, his voice filled with regret. Jack clenched his fists, frustration and fear gnawing at him. We can't change the past now. We just need to find a way out of this nightmare. But as they continued to walk, the very landscape of the swamp seemed to shift and contort around them. Trees that had once been landmarks disappeared, replaced by eerily similar ones. The ground beneath their feet felt unstable, as if the swamp were conspiring to swallow them whole. We've been walking in circles, Ethan said, his voice filled with resignation. Ben's flashlight beam flickered as he replied, It's like the swamp is changing its shape to keep us here. Desperation set in as they realized the truth. They were trapped in a nightmarish labyrinth, a maze of shifting shadows and unseen forces. The swamp itself had become their adversary, and their attempts to find an escape route were futile. As the hours passed, exhaustion weighed them down, and the constant repetition of their surroundings wore away at their sanity. They had no way of knowing how long they had been wandering, but the swamp's malevolence showed no signs of relenting. The eerie lights that had once seemed like playful spirits now danced maliciously, leading them further into the heart of the nightmare. The whispers in the wind grew louder, their voices mocking and taunting. The mournful wail that had haunted their journey seemed to echo in their very bones. Panic surged through them as they realized the truth. They were utterly and completely lost in a place where the rules of reality no longer applied. The supernatural forces of Bear Creek Swamp had ensnared them in a malevolent game, and there was no way out. We have to stick together, Jack urged, his voice trembling with fear. We can't let this place break us. But the relentless pressure of the swamp continued to wear them down. Shadows seemed to move independently of their source, and the darkness became a suffocating presence that pressed in on them from all sides. As they stumbled forward, the realization sank in that they were at the mercy of forces beyond their comprehension. Bear Creek Swamp had become their tormentor, and they were the unwitting players in a nightmarish game of survival. With each step they took, they couldn't escape the feeling that the swamp was watching, that it had become an entity with a malevolent will of its own. In the heart of this cursed domain, they were lost and trapped, and their hope of finding an escape was fading with every passing moment. Chapter 9. The Swamp's Malevolence. The Fearless Four had lost track of time in the unending nightmare of Bear Creek Swamp. Their flashlights had become feeble beacons in the oppressive darkness, their batteries fading as the hours wore on. Despair gnawed at the edges of their resolve, and the relentless malevolence of the swamp seemed to tighten its grip. As they stumbled forward, their senses were assaulted by the swamp's eerie whispers and the shifting shadows that danced around them. The very air seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, as if the swamp itself had taken on a sinister life of its own. And then, as if in response to their growing terror, the swamp thing emerged from the darkness. It materialized before them, a grotesque fusion of mud, twigs, and decaying flesh. Its form was ever-changing, shifting and contorting as if it were composed of the very elements of the swamp itself. Panic seized the Fearless Four as they beheld the abomination that blocked their path. The swamp thing's supernatural powers were on full display, and there was no denying that it held dominion over this cursed domain. Jack's voice trembled as he stammered, "What? What is that thing?" Ethan's logical mind struggled to find an explanation, but the swamp thing's appearance defied all reason. "It's not possible. It can't exist." The swamp thing seemed to revel in their fear, its hollow eyes fixed upon them with a malevolent glee. It extended a twisted limb, its fingers ending in jagged, mud-caked claws. With a sickening squelch, it reached out and touched Jack's shoulder. In an instant, Jack's surroundings shifted and morphed. The swamp transformed into a grotesque, nightmarish landscape, a funhouse of horrors. Trees twisted into grotesque shapes, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The ground became a shifting, treacherous maze of mud and muck. Mike's voice cracked with terror as he screamed, "What's happening? This can't be real." But the swamp thing's powers were not limited to mere illusions. It possessed a hypnotic ability that toyed with their minds, making them question the very nature of reality. The Fearless Four were trapped in a nightmarish dreamscape, unable to distinguish fact from fiction. As they stumbled through the surreal landscape, the swamp thing continued to torment them. It whispered maddening riddles in their ears, its voice a haunting refrain that burrowed into their minds. It created hallucinations that left them disoriented and terrified, their senses betraying them at every turn. Ben's voice wavered as he cried out, "We have to fight it. We can't let this thing control us." With sheer determination, they struggled to break free from the swamp thing's influence. They clung to their dwindling grip on reality, each step forward a battle against the supernatural forces that surrounded them. But the swamp's malevolence was unrelenting, and the swamp thing reveled in their suffering. It was a malevolent entity that had become one with Bear Creek Swamp itself, and the Fearless Four were powerless in its clutches. As they continued to navigate the shifting, nightmarish landscape, they couldn't shake the feeling that the swamp thing was not only toying with their minds but also leading them deeper into its cursed domain. In the heart of Bear Creek Swamp, they were ensnared in a web of malevolence from which there seemed to be no escape. Chapter 10. Fight for Survival. The Fearless Four had descended into a nightmarish realm within Bear Creek Swamp. The swamp thing, a grotesque fusion of mud, twigs, and decay, wielded its supernatural powers with malevolent glee. It tormented them with illusions and whispered madness into their minds, driving them to the brink of despair. But as the darkness closed in around them, they knew they had to confront not only the horrors of the swamp but also their own inner demons and fears. "We can't let this thing break us," Jack declared, his voice filled with determination. "We've faced our share of challenges together. We can fight our way out of this." Ethan nodded in agreement, his analytical mind racing to find a solution. "We need a plan. We need to outsmart the swamp thing." Mike's eyes burned with a fierce resolve. "We can't let fear control us. We have to face our own insecurities and doubts." And so, with a newfound sense of purpose, they set about devising a plan to break the swamp thing's hold on them. They knew that their unity as friends was their greatest strength, and they would need every ounce of courage to prevail. Step by step, they confronted their individual fears. Jack, the daredevil, had to grapple with his recklessness and learn to temper his bravado with caution. Ethan, the rational thinker, had to open his mind to the possibility of the supernatural and let go of his need for logical explanations. Mike, the skeptic, had to acknowledge the reality of the horrors they faced and find the courage to believe in the unknown. Ben, the quiet observer, had to trust in his own intuition and take a leadership role in guiding their actions. As they faced their inner demons, the Swamp Thing continued to torment them, conjuring nightmarish visions and whispering cruel taunts. But the fearless four held fast to their determination, refusing to let fear control them. With their newfound clarity, they hatched a daring plan. They would use their flashlights to create a blinding, dazzling display of light, hoping to disorient the Swamp Thing and disrupt its hypnotic abilities. It was a gamble, a desperate bid for freedom in a place where the rules of reality no longer applied. As they put their plan into action, their flashlights crisscrossed the night, creating a blinding symphony of light that shattered the illusions around them. The Swamp Thing screeched in anguish, its form contorting and writhing as if in agony. For a fleeting moment, they saw through the illusions, the nightmarish visions fading into the background. The swamp became a tangible, albeit treacherous, landscape once more. With a burst of adrenaline-fueled determination, they seized the opportunity to make their escape. They ran through the shifting, mud-soaked terrain, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like beacons of hope. But the Swamp Thing, wounded but not defeated, pursued them relentlessly. Its shape shifted and twisted in a grotesque display of rage, its supernatural powers on full display. As they pushed through the swamp's malevolence, their unity as friends was their greatest strength. They supported one another, helping those who stumbled, and pressing on with unwavering determination. Their flight from the Swamp Thing was a harrowing battle of wills, a test of courage in the face of unrelenting terror. But they refused to yield to the malevolence that surrounded them. With one final burst of effort, they burst through the oppressive darkness and into a moonlit clearing. The Swamp Thing, unable to follow them beyond its cursed domain, let out a howl of impotent rage. The fearless four collapsed on the solid ground, panting and gasping for breath. They had faced their fears, confronted the malevolence of Bear Creek Swamp, and emerged victorious. But as they caught their breath, they couldn't shake the feeling that the swamp's malevolence still lingered, that their ordeal was far from over. In the heart of this cursed domain, they had fought for their survival, and the shadows of the swamp still whispered of untold horrors yet to come. Chapter 11, Descent into Darkness. The fearless four had fought their way through the malevolent clutches of Bear Creek Swamp, escaping the relentless pursuit of the Swamp Thing. But their ordeal was far from over, and the swamp's shadows continued to whisper of horrors that awaited them. As they ventured deeper into the heart of the cursed swamp, their flashlights cut through the oppressive darkness, revealing twisted trees and murky waters that seemed to stretch on endlessly. They were driven by a relentless curiosity, a need to understand the haunting mysteries that had drawn them into this nightmare. They stumbled upon an ancient, gnarled tree, its trunk covered in moss and vines. The tree seemed to exude an eerie presence, as if it held the secrets of the swamp within its gnarled branches. Ethan, the logical thinker, couldn't resist the urge to investigate. He approached the tree cautiously, his flashlight revealing strange markings etched into the bark. The markings resembled ancient symbols, cryptic and foreboding. "It's like some sort of writing," Ethan murmured, his brow furrowing in concentration. Mike, ever the skeptic, remained skeptical. "It's probably just some prank. This swamp has a way of playing tricks on your mind." But as they examined the markings more closely, a sense of unease settled over them. The symbols seemed to tell a story, a tragic history of Bear Creek Swamp. With growing trepidation, they realized that the swamp had not always been a place of horror. Long ago, it had been home to a Creek Indian tribe, a peaceful people who lived in harmony with the land. But the arrival of European settlers had brought devastation and bloodshed. The Creek Indians had been driven from their ancestral home, forced to endure hardship and suffering. The swamp had witnessed the horrors of war, the cries of the displaced, and the anguish of lives torn apart. And then, as if in response to the atrocities committed on its sacred grounds, the swamp had awakened. It had become a malevolent entity, a hungry beast that thirsted for souls to feed its insatiable appetite for vengeance. The Fearless Four listened in horrified fascination as the tragic history of Bear Creek Swamp unfolded before them. The swamp had become a living embodiment of suffering and sorrow, a place where the souls of the damned were bound to its cursed domain. Jack's voice quivered as he whispered, "The swamp. It's not just haunted by ghosts. It's hungry for souls." Ethan nodded, his mind racing to make sense of the revelation. The swamp thing, the vengeful spirits, the illusions. It's all part of the swamp's insatiable hunger. It feeds on our fear and despair. They knew then that they were not just fighting against supernatural forces. They were battling the very essence of the swamp itself. Bear Creek Swamp had become a malevolent entity that sought to consume their souls, to add their suffering to the countless others who had perished within its cursed depths. As they descended further into the heart of darkness, the Fearless Four couldn't help but feel that they were walking a path fraught with danger and uncertainty. The swamp's tragic history had revealed a horrifying truth. They were not the hunters in this nightmarish game, but the hunted, and the swamp's hunger for souls showed no signs of abating. Chapter 12. The final confrontation. The Fearless Four had descended deeper into the heart of Bear Creek Swamp, their understanding of its malevolent nature growing with each step. They had uncovered the tragic history that had transformed the once peaceful land into a cursed domain, where the swamp hungered for the souls of the living. As they ventured further, the oppressive darkness seemed to thicken, closing in around them like a suffocating shroud. They knew that the final confrontation with the swamp thing, the living embodiment of the swamp's malevolence, was inevitable. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, casting eerie shadows that danced upon the twisted trees and murky waters. The air was heavy with the weight of the swamp's presence, and the mournful wail that had haunted their journey seemed to echo in their very souls. Suddenly, as they rounded a bend in the swamp, they saw it, an abomination of mud, twigs, and decay, the swamp thing itself. It stood before them, its form shifting and contorting as if it were composed of the very elements of the swamp. But this time, there was something different about the swamp thing. It no longer hid behind illusions or whispered taunts. It revealed its true malevolent form, and its hollow eyes fixated on the Fearless Four with a hunger that sent shivers down their spines. Jack, fueled by a fierce determination, took a step forward. "We won't be your victims any longer. We know what you are, and we're not afraid." The swamp thing emitted a low, guttural growl, its grotesque form writhing in anger. It was a creature born of suffering and sorrow, a malevolent force that had tormented countless souls throughout the ages. Ethan, the rational thinker, spoke with conviction. "You may hunger for our souls, but we won't give in to fear. We have each other, and together, we are stronger than you." Mike, the skeptic turned believer, nodded in agreement. "You may have haunted this swamp for centuries, but we won't be your prey. We will fight to escape this nightmare." Ben, the quiet observer, added his voice to the defiant chorus. "We've faced our inner demons, and we've faced you. We won't let you consume us." With a collective strength born of their friendship and their shared resolve, the Fearless Four took a bold step forward, their flashlights converging on the swamp thing like beacons of defiance. The malevolent entity screeched in fury, its form writhing in agony. But the friends pressed on, their unity as a team a powerful force against the swamp's insatiable hunger. With every step they took, they pushed back against the darkness that sought to consume them. And then, as if in response to their unwavering bravery, the swamp began to change. Its oppressive presence lifted, and the shadows that had haunted their journey retreated. The mournful wail grew fainter, and the eerie lights that had danced maliciously dimmed. The swamp thing, unable to withstand the collective strength and bravery of the Fearless Four, let out one final, anguished howl. Its form began to disintegrate, the mud, twigs, and decay falling away like a grotesque shroud. In its place stood the vision of a peaceful, unspoiled swamp, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. The ancient tree with the cryptic symbols stood before them, its branches reaching out like a guardian of the land. The friends exchanged a glance, a mixture of relief and awe filling their hearts. They had faced the ultimate terror of Bear Creek Swamp and emerged victorious. As they turned to leave the cursed domain behind, they couldn't help but wonder if they had witnessed the true nature of the swamp, a place where the line between reality and the supernatural was blurred, where the past and present coexisted in a haunting tapestry of suffering and redemption. The Fearless Four had confronted their fears and fought against the malevolence of Bear Creek Swamp, and in doing so, they had uncovered the untold secrets that lay hidden within its depths. But as they made their way back to the world of the living, they knew that the haunting memories of their ordeal would stay with them, a reminder that in the face of unimaginable horrors, their courage had prevailed. Chapter 13. The Escape. The Fearless Four had confronted the malevolent forces of Bear Creek Swamp and emerged from its cursed depths, but they were forever changed by the horrors they had witnessed. As they made their way back to the world of the living, the weight of their ordeal hung heavy upon them. Their flashlights cut through the oppressive darkness one last time as they navigated the treacherous terrain of the swamp. The mournful wail that had haunted their journey grew fainter with each step, fading into the distance like a ghostly echo. Jack, Mike, Ethan, and Ben had faced unimaginable terrors, both external and within themselves. They had battled the Swamp Thing, encountered vengeful spirits, and delved into the tragic history of the cursed land. Their friendship had been their greatest strength, and their unity had allowed them to defy the malevolent forces that sought to consume them. But the scars of their ordeal ran deep, etched into their minds and souls. They had glimpsed the supernatural, witnessed the malevolence of the swamp, and grappled with their own inner demons. It was an experience that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. As they finally emerged from the swamp's clutches and stepped onto solid ground, a sense of relief washed over them. The moonlight bathed them in its gentle glow, offering a stark contrast to the darkness they had left behind. They exchanged exhausted glances, their faces etched with weariness and the weight of what they had endured. The swamp had tested their courage, their friendship, and their very sanity. They knew that they would never be the same again. "We made it," Jack whispered, his voice filled with both disbelief and gratitude. Mike nodded, his skepticism forever transformed into a belief in the unknown. "We faced the unimaginable, and we survived." Ethan, the rational thinker, contemplated the mysteries they had uncovered. The swamp is a place where the boundaries between the living and the supernatural blur. It's a realm of darkness and redemption. Ben, the quiet observer, spoke softly. "We'll carry this experience with us for the rest of our lives. We can't forget what we've seen." Together, they turned their backs on Bear Creek Swamp, leaving behind the haunting mysteries and malevolent forces that had tested their very souls. The swamp had become a part of them, a dark chapter in their lives that they could never fully close. As they walked away, the mournful wail of the swamp faded into the night, a haunting melody that would forever linger in their memories. The Fearless Four had escaped the cursed domain, scarred and forever changed, but they carried with them the knowledge that in the face of unimaginable horrors, their friendship had been their greatest strength, and their courage had allowed them to defy the darkness. Chapter 14. Lingering Shadows. The Fearless Four had escaped Bear Creek Swamp, but the shadows of their nightmarish ordeal clung to them like a curse. As they tried to resume their lives in the world of the living, they found that the malevolence of the cursed swamp continued to haunt them. The memories of that fateful night remained etched into their minds, vivid and unrelenting. Jack, Mike, Ethan, and Ben had faced the unimaginable together, and the bond forged in the crucible of fear was unbreakable. But the horrors they had witnessed had left scars that ran deep. Jack, once the daredevil of the group, found himself plagued by nightmares. In his dreams, he was back in the swamp, pursued by the shape-shifting swamp thing and tormented by vengeful spirits. He would wake in a cold sweat, the echoes of his screams haunting the night. Mike, the former skeptic-turned-believer, couldn't shake the feeling that they had brought something back with them from the swamp. He would often hear whispers in the dark, the same sinister voice that had whispered, "Get out of here." The presence of the supernatural had become an ever-present specter in his life. Ethan, the rational thinker, became obsessed with unraveling the mysteries of Bear Creek Swamp. He delved into books and research, seeking answers that eluded him. His once sharp mind was consumed by the need to understand the unexplainable. Ben, the quiet observer, withdrew into himself. He had always been attuned to the subtle nuances of the world around him, but now he sensed a darkness that clung to him like a second skin. He felt as though he was being watched, even in the safety of his own home. Their friendship, once a source of strength, now served as a reminder of the horrors they had faced. They couldn't escape the knowledge that the swamp's malevolence continued to linger in their lives, a malevolent presence that refused to release its hold. One fateful night, as they gathered at Jack's house, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken fears. They knew that they had to confront the lingering shadows of Bear Creek Swamp to find a way to free themselves from the malevolence that clung to them. "We can't let this haunt us forever," Jack declared, his voice trembling with a mixture of determination and fear. Mike nodded, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "We have to find a way to break this curse." Ethan, his research yielding no answers, spoke with frustration. "There has to be a way to banish the darkness that follows us." Ben, ever the observer, spoke softly. "We have to confront our fears, face the darkness head-on." With a collective resolve, they gathered their flashlights, just as they had in the swamp. This time, they weren't venturing into the cursed domain, but into the depths of their own souls. As they turned on their flashlights, the room was bathed in an eerie glow, and the whispers in the dark grew louder. The malevolent presence seemed to converge upon them, its grip tightening. But the fearless four refused to yield to fear. They would confront their nightmares, their doubts, and the lingering shadows of Bear Creek Swamp. In the dim light of the flashlights, they faced their own inner demons, each one battling the darkness that had taken root within them. Their struggles were a testament to their courage, a final battle against the malevolence that sought to consume them. As the hours passed, they found solace in each other's presence, their friendship serving as a beacon of hope in the face of darkness. And as the night wore on, the whispers grew fainter, the shadows receding. When dawn broke, the room was bathed in the soft light of morning, and the oppressive presence that had haunted them was gone. They knew that the malevolence of Bear Creek Swamp would always be a part of their lives, but they had faced it together and emerged stronger for it. As they left Jack's house that morning, the fearless four knew that their journey was far from over. The shadows of their nightmarish ordeal would continue to linger, but they were no longer defined by fear. They had confronted their inner demons and found the strength to move forward, forever changed but unbroken. Bear Creek Swamp's malevolence had tested their friendship, their courage, and their very souls. But in the end, it was their unity and unwavering determination that allowed them to defy the darkness and emerge from the shadows, scarred but stronger than ever. Chapter 15, a warning to others. The fearless four had faced the malevolent forces of Bear Creek Swamp, emerging from its cursed depths forever changed. They had confronted their inner demons, their doubts, and the lingering shadows that had clung to them like a curse. But their ordeal had left them with a sense of responsibility, a duty to warn others of the horrors that lurked in the darkness. As the weeks passed and the memories of their nightmarish experience slowly began to fade, Jack, Mike, Ethan, and Ben gathered once again. This time, their purpose was clear: to share their harrowing story as a warning to anyone who dared to venture into the darkness of Bear Creek Swamp. The room was filled with an air of solemnity as they prepared to recount their tale. Their flashlights, once tools of survival, now served as a metaphorical beacon to pierce the darkness of ignorance that surrounded the cursed swamp. Jack, the storyteller of the group, began the narrative. His voice trembled with a mixture of fear and determination as he described their ill-fated journey into the swamp, the chilling legends that had lured them, and the horrors they had faced. Mike, the skeptic-turned-believer, spoke of the sinister whispers that had haunted their every step and the malevolent presence that had followed them home. He shared his conviction that the swamp was a place where the supernatural and the real converged, a realm where the line between life and death blurred. Ethan, the rational thinker, delved into the research he had conducted, uncovering the tragic history of Bear Creek Swamp. He spoke of the Creek Indians, the Civil War soldiers, and the early settlers whose spirits still roamed the cursed land. He emphasized that the swamp was a place where the past and present coexisted in a haunting tapestry of suffering and redemption. Ben, the quiet observer, shared his own experiences, the nightmares that had plagued him, the whispers in the dark, and the feeling of being watched. He spoke of the inner demons they had confronted, the darkness within themselves that had mirrored the malevolence of the swamp. As they recounted their tale, the room seemed to grow colder, and the whispers in the dark grew louder. The malevolent presence that had haunted them during their reflection seemed to converge upon them once more, as if angered by their defiance. But the fearless four refused to yield. They had faced the horrors of Bear Creek Swamp, and they were determined to share their story as a warning to others. Their voices grew stronger, their resolve unshakable. When they had finished their tale, a heavy silence hung in the room. They knew that their duty was done, that they had fulfilled their responsibility to those who might be tempted to venture into the cursed swamp. Jack spoke one final time, his voice filled with a sense of closure. "We may never fully escape the shadows of Bear Creek Swamp, but we can use our experience to protect others. Let our story be a warning, a cautionary tale of the horrors that await those who dare to enter the darkness." Mike, Ethan, and Ben nodded in agreement, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and sadness. They had faced the malevolence of the swamp and emerged from its clutches stronger and wiser. Their friendship had been tested, and they had prevailed. As they left the room that night, they couldn't help but wonder if their warning would reach those who needed it most. Bear Creek Swamp would always be a place of mystery and danger, a cursed domain where the line between reality and the supernatural was blurred. But the fearless four had faced its horrors, and they had emerged as survivors, scarred but unbroken. They knew that their journey was far from over, that the shadows of their nightmarish ordeal would continue to linger. But they also knew that they had a duty to protect others from the malevolence that awaited in the darkness, and they would carry that responsibility with them for the rest of their lives. Chapter 16 Epilogue. The Fearless Four had shared their harrowing tale as a warning to others, hoping to prevent anyone from falling victim to the malevolent forces of Bear Creek Swamp. They had confronted their inner demons, faced the horrors of the cursed swamp, and emerged scarred but stronger. Yet, as they attempted to move on with their lives, a chilling revelation hinted at a lingering terror that refused to fade. It was a year after their nightmarish ordeal when the first signs of the swamp's lingering grip became apparent. Jack, who had always been the most adventurous of the group, was the first to notice. He had taken up a job as a forest ranger, patrolling the woods around Bear Creek Swamp. One evening, as he walked the familiar trails, he saw something that sent a shiver down his spine, a glimpse of the swamp thing, the creature of mud, twigs, and decaying flesh. It was there one moment, lurking in the shadows, and gone the next. He dismissed it as a trick of the mind, a manifestation of his lingering fears. Mike, who had become increasingly convinced that they had brought something back with them, began to experience strange phenomena in his home. Objects moved on their own, whispers echoed through empty rooms, and his sleep was plagued by vivid nightmares. He tried to rationalize it, blaming stress or fatigue, but the presence of the supernatural in his life was undeniable. Ethan's obsession with unraveling the mysteries of the swamp continued unabated. He had amassed a collection of books and documents on the subject, poring over them day and night. His once sharp mind had become consumed by the need to understand, to find a way to banish the darkness that lingered in their lives. Ben, always attuned to the subtle nuances of the world around him, began to feel a sense of dread that never left him. He sensed a darkness that followed him wherever he went, a presence that watched and waited. His quiet observations had turned into a constant vigilance. As the four friends compared their experiences, a chilling realization began to take hold. Bear Creek Swamp had not released its grasp on them, despite their warnings and their efforts to move on. The malevolence of the cursed land had become a part of their lives, an insidious presence that refused to fade. One evening, as they gathered to discuss their growing fears, the room seemed to grow colder, and the whispers in the dark grew louder. The malevolent presence that had haunted them before seemed to converge upon them once more, as if angered by their attempts to resist. They exchanged fearful glances, the weight of their shared burden pressing down on them. Jack spoke first, his voice quivering with a mixture of dread and defiance. "We thought we had escaped the swamp's grasp, but it's still here, still watching us." Mike nodded in agreement, his skepticism long gone. "It won't let us go. It's like a curse that we can't shake." Ethan, his obsession driving him forward, searched for answers. "We have to find a way to break this hold, to banish the darkness once and for all." Ben, ever the quiet observer, spoke softly. "We can't do it alone. We need to face this together, just like we did in the swamp." With a collective resolve, they once again took up their flashlights, the same ones that had illuminated their journey through Bear Creek Swamp. This time, they weren't venturing into the cursed domain, but into the depths of their own souls. As they turned on their flashlights, the room was bathed in an eerie glow, and the whispers in the dark grew louder. The malevolent presence seemed to converge upon them, its grip tightening. But the fearless four refused to yield. They had faced the horrors of Bear Creek Swamp, and they were determined to confront the lingering terror that refused to fade. Their friendship, their unity, would be their greatest strength once more. As they stood together, facing the darkness that had become a part of their lives, they couldn't help but wonder if their journey would ever truly be over. Bear Creek Swamp had tested their courage, their friendship, and their very souls, and it seemed that its malevolence would haunt them forever. But the fearless four had faced the unknown before, and they were not about to back down now. They knew that the battle against the lingering terror would be their greatest challenge yet, but they were resolved to face it together, scarred but unbroken. As they confronted the malevolent presence that had become a part of them, they could only hope that one day they would find a way to break free from the shadows of Bear Creek Swamp, once and for all. We hope you have enjoyed our storytelling offering tonight. Please be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to be alerted of future weekly additions to our collections. Paranormal Untold Stories.